Welcome to Intangibles, a podcast about the traits, behaviors, and qualities that entrepreneurs can cultivate to help be successful. This podcast is created by Antecedent Ventures, an enterprise-focused seed-stage venture firm in New York City. You can find us at www.antecedent.vc. I'm your host, Steve BERG. This season is brought to you by Denton's Venture Technology Group at dentonsventurebeyond.com. Operating as a boutique within the world's largest law firm, the Venture Technology Group runs with hard-charging tech entrepreneurs to drive growth through strategic business, finance, and legal advice, from Silicon Valley and New York to London, Berlin, Hong Kong, and beyond. Learn more at dentonsventurebeyond.com. Today's topic is what I'm calling humanness. It is my view that the most important qualities people can have in the coming age of automation and artificial intelligence are things like empathy, humor, listening skills, humility, and curiosity. These are the qualities at the core of being human, and they are the qualities that machines aren't as good at yet. To me, it stands to reason that these qualities associated with EQ, also known as emotional intelligence, are what society will place a higher value on going forward. An ancillary benefit, as we have started to discover during this podcast, is that humanness also tends to be good for building a strong company culture, finding product market fit, and driving innovation in early stage companies. For our discussion today, we have not only someone that has helped inform my opinion, but someone who has done a great deal more thinking about this topic than I have. George Anders is a business journalist and author. He has worked as an editor or staff writer at the Wall Street Journal, Fast Company, and Bloomberg View. He's written 5 books, including the New York Times bestseller, Perfect Enough. His most recent book is called You Can Do Anything, The Surprising Power of a Useless Liberal Arts Education. And this is the topic I'm going to be talking to him about today. Hi, George. Thanks for talking to me today.
Hi, glad to be on the show.
What did I leave out of the introduction? Is there anything that I should have said about you that I did not?
That is very comprehensive. We are ready to dig into the topic at hand.
Excellent. It's good to know that I haven't omitted anything. So I'm going to just get straight to the heart of what I think is the issue. Between the year 2008 and 2010, the U.S. economy lost 8.8 million jobs. Many of those jobs didn't come back. In your view, why was this the case?
So we had a tremendous amount of construction and manufacturing that took a hit because of the financial crisis. And in manufacturing, anytime you go visit a factory, it's kind of amazing how much is getting automated now. And the machines take care of themselves. There just are not the level of jobs that we used to have there. We've also seen some cutbacks in the very routine parts of services. When I started work, there was a payroll clerk, and the person, stapled together our expense accounts and the like. And now there's Concur software and a lot of other ways to deal with that. ATMs have meant that banks don't need as many people to count out 10s and 20s. That gets done automatically. So that's been a big shift. But the bright news is that there's an awful lot that people do that machines can't. And as the economy has come bouncing back, there are a lot of job growth areas, including some in areas that you really wouldn't expect. Right.
Before I get to those, I want to know, do you think this is the new reality? Is every time there's an economic downturn, are we going to see a new chunk of jobs get automated away?
We've actually been in that world for probably 200 years. And there must have been someone in the panic of 1893 that goes, oh my goodness, these are hard times for people, tilling fields, and there just aren't as many jobs in agriculture anymore. And here comes the combine and the thresher. But we're a pretty good economy at creating new jobs. So yes, if we look backwards, there's always a sense of loss. But if we look forward, there's a sense of opportunity and of gain.
Yeah. So that is brighter. And I do want to dig into that later on and talk about the number of jobs lost versus the number gained. But I want to a little bit talk about the sentiment that increased pace of automation seems to have kind of bred in us. To me, it seems clear that the systematic shock of all of those jobs being lost did have an impact on people's perspectives. which included a number of things, including distrust of some of their employers who they thought they'd probably be working for their entire careers, a distrust of politicians, as well as people's own concerns about their ability to maintain their personal well-being into the future. They're starting to question that. And I mean, as I look at it, it seems like the waves of that particular shock are being, despite the fact, that you mentioned a lot of those jobs are come back, the waves of that shock are being felt even today. Am I alone in that view? Do you share that view, or is it something else?
I like your core concept. And in fact, let's stretch it into another area too. I think it's radically changed the way we think about college. And if you go back to the days when college tuition was less and we were close to a full employment economy, people could go to college and try whatever they wanted, and the assumption was it'll all work out. And now we're in an environment where we've got a lot of anxious parents that look at the size of tuition bills and look at the amount of student debt that's associated with it and students themselves. And our time horizons have shortened tremendously, that we're now in a stage where we think a lot more about starting salaries. What am I going to get? What's my payback? And in some cases, people's time horizons shrink from decades to years or even months.
Yeah.
And on the one hand, that's led to a big boom in people going in for business degrees or nursing or accounting or other fields. But it's also compromised our willingness to go pick up skills that might be useful 10 or 20 or 30 years down the road. And we've become very short term in the way we think about college. And I worry that we're missing some really good opportunities to stretch your mind and explore the world and just kind of come away as a different kind of person at 22 than you were at 18.
Yeah. I wonder, what I'm concerned about is that the cynicism of these particular social constructs that you're talking about, education included, that it's going to get more ingrained as automation erodes, whole industries, and with them, people's confidence about what they can and can't do, and also their self-worth. I think, for example, a lot of people, the first question that you ask them, so what do you do? And if you get to the point where people can't answer that confidently, that's the beginning of fraying of social fabric.
That's certainly a risk. At the same time, you look at the past 4 years, we've created 12 million jobs in the U.S. economy net. We've gone from 8% unemployment to 4.3% unemployment. We're anxious. We're worried. We're fearful that the specter of automation is chasing us through the graveyard at night. But at the same time, we're pretty good at creating jobs. So I think the reality here is a little better than some of the darkest worries. But we are sorting ourselves through this stage of the economy with a high degree of anxiety. I mean, think about something like self-driving cars and what that means to be a truck driver. There are not a lot of people age 22 going, I'd like to get certified as a truck driver because I know that's going to be a good job for 30 years. It probably won't be. So by extension, people are having to rethink, where's my opportunity? You can't just follow the playbook that worked for mom and dad. You need to start looking in places that the older generation might not even see jobs.
So the optimism in your mind is, and should be, with the youth. If you're a truck driver now, you're going to have to think of something else.
Yeah, in fact, there's a split that I quote in the book of any new technology that comes into place before you're about 14, you just assume that's the way the world's always been. And then anything between about age 14 to age 35, you go, this is good. I could make a career out of this stuff. And then if it comes in after age 35, you just think it's a violation of the natural order.
Right.
So I was around a bunch of senior citizens who were very unhappy with smartphones and texting. And I'm in that transition group where, okay, I can get good with that. And then you look at any teenager today, and that's just the world they live in. That, for them to imagine note cards and phone books and sort of all these relics of a previous generation, it just cracks them up.
Right. So, I mean, it could go either of two ways. You're giving us the sunnier side, which, is, frankly, as someone who spent more time thinking about that, is, helpful to me to kind of is reassuring. But, and I guess what you're saying, and I just want to confirm, is we're not going to get to the point in the future where we see this automation and this employment erosion, and we're just going to be completely disrupted in terms of how an economy even works?
So let me give you a simple example on automation, but I think it's a parable that'll speak to a lot of other things. The National Football League has had instant replay and really excellent camera angles for about 30 years. And in theory, you could get rid of just about all of the referees on the field. But they haven't done that. They're all still there, partly because there's some really weird angles that you can only get on the play if you're on the field and moving around, but also because there's a sense of showmanship. And when the penalty's called, that yellow flag is hurled onto the field with great drama, and the guy comes over and he puts his hands on his hips, or he makes these rotating gestures, and he's mic'd up and he announces it. And there's an element of theater. So even though we've brought in cameras to football refereeing, we actually now have more refs than we did 30 years ago, because we've got all the ones on the field and we've got the guys up in the booth. And if you look around, it's surprising how many other jobs are taking automation under the wing and are still using it as a way of increasing employment. And I've been hearing since the early 90s that radiology was a doomed field and that we were all going to go to telemedicine. And we do move X-rays and MRIs around digitally, but we still don't quite trust the machines to tell you that's a tumor, that's not a tumor, that's a broken bone, that's not a broken bone. We want people to be doing that. Pilots, autopilot right now can land and take off a plane pretty darn well, but we still want a human being in the cockpit. And the notion of getting into a plane without a person in there, I don't know about you, but I would have a hard time doing that, especially in bumpy weather. And I'm thinking, does the machine even care if we land this plane? I like to know that there's a pilot in there. And I think a lot of automation will become helpful in people's work. It will redefine jobs. It will take away some of the drudgery. But I don't see mass extinction of human employment. I do see a much greater role for people who can bring personality and charisma and trust and empathy and all the things you were talking about. That's where we're going to earn our keep.
So the point you just made is like the most encouraging point I've ever come across in that debate. And I think, to paraphrase what you just said, just because the technology allows us to eliminate jobs doesn't mean that we have to adopt it in such a way that it does kind of extinct certain professions.
That's really nicely said. And in fact, there was a big study in 2013 by a bunch of Oxford University researchers that got a huge amount of press, where they said 47% of all jobs are in danger of being automated in the next 20 years. And it elicited the level of shrieks and dismay that you would expect. And those guys have actually dialed back a bit on their numbers now, and they say close to half of jobs will be influenced by automation and technology, but they're no longer as convinced that they're going to get automated. I'll give you another example. So financial advisors, stockbrokers, investment managers, the people who tell rich people what to do with their money, that's a field that in theory could be completely automated. There are algorithms that will now tell you how much you should have in stocks and bonds and how to rebalance it, and you could hand that over to a computer. But we don't. And the reason isn't that people can outthink the computer. If anything, humans work off those algorithms. But there's an element of trust and caring about people. And are you saving money for that retirement home? Are you, working through a divorce and you're trying to figure out who's going to get what half? You want someone who cares about you and not just cares about, the zeros and eights and nines in your bank balance. And that's actually been a growth field. So that ability to deliver the human component is very much in demand, even though the underlying math all gets done by machine now.
Right. So if I am a young person or just a post-college person, I think that, obviously I won't choose to pay attention or go into a field that I think, does have shrinkage as associated with technology. But as you point out, I can do anything with a useless liberal arts education. What might I be doing?
So let me point to a couple really fast-growing job areas that most people don't think about. I'm going to start with market research, and I'm going to assume that just about everyone listening to this podcast has, within the past month, either filled out one of those online surveys or at the very least had to decide whether you do or not. And you stay at a hotel, they send you something afterward. Did you have a good time? You get something from the airline. How did you like that? You go to the doctor or the vet and, did we take good care of your puppy? I mean, these things are endless, but they're useful in helping businesses calibrate what they do. It's much easier to deliver those surveys automatically, but you need people to write the questions and analyze the questions and decide what to do. And we've had close to 60% job growth in market research and marketing. These are good jobs, typical pay $60,000 to $90,000 a year. You do need a college degree. You don't need to have a 3.9 from MIT. And that's a booming field you don't hear people talk about much. But if you're a psychology major or if you come out with any other non-technical degree, you can play a role in that field.
Right. So, I mean, this is that intersection that I think you're talking about. And this is where you are making the case, and I agree with the case, that when you inject humanity into the new paradigm of technology, that we actually can come up with a hybrid, something different, something more interesting. And I think, I'll touch on it a little bit later in the discussion, but there's a number of different places where you can combine that value. And maybe even more important, that value, the humanness component, is essential, right? You can't actually even come up with the new job description without it.
Yes, it is. And one of the big challenges is how do we make technology pleasant to use? And if you think about automated speech, the initial recordings where, the number you have called is not in service, it's dreadful. It's an unpleasant experience. It's the kind of thing you parody. And then you get to something like Siri that does it better, but it doesn't all do it by software. It does it with human intervention. And then you get to Alexa, which is Amazon's big project there. They have an anthropologist in charge of Alexa's personality. They have a bunch of music majors and English majors sort of shaping and contouring the way that Alexa communicates with the world. Even something like that, which is artificial intelligence in its rawest form, still needs some human involvement to make it seem pleasant, likable, to get rapport right. And you can't automate that away. And those actually end up being interesting jobs to go take.
So I'm going with the premise then that, in fact, those qualities are becoming more and more valuable over time. And you had spoken about market research just a second ago. I loved the formulas that you had in the book. And the one for market, I'll just start out with the one because that one's off the top of my head. The market research one is curiosity plus data scientists.
You can go a lot of places with that. And in fact, I'm seeing data teams hiring English majors because what does a good data scientist do? They tell stories with numbers. And you've now got software that will click out that number and your standard deviation and your R squared and everything. You still need someone to get up in front of a room and say, here's what I think we should do. And it turns out that English majors are pretty good at that. And they know how to connect with the audience. They know how to use parables and imagery. And those human skills are very handy.
So there's a couple other ones that I'm just going to put out there because they're just so ingenious. But then I'm actually going to ask you about some qualities in particular to see if you have comment on. You highlighted genetic counseling as empathy plus gene sequencing, which I thought was fantastic, and social media manager as creativity plus information networks. All right, so there's a couple of qualities that you touched on in the book. I'm going to read them, and if there's anything specifically you want to comment on, that'd be great. And even better, if we can relate them to early stage companies, which, as you know, that's an interest area for me. So listening.
And listening is a lot harder than it seems, that you're not just paying attention to the literal words coming out of people's mouths. You're paying attention to what they don't say. You're paying attention to what they repeat again and again, almost trying too hard to get you to believe it. You're listening to their tone. Are they confident? Are they nervous? And then you try and work with people to bring them on board. And this is a reason why doctors, your basic internist, the person who you see in that 15-minute visit, they're not just running through symptoms and blood pressure. they're trying to figure out, how are you feeling? Are you depressed? Are you anxious? Is there something in your life that you haven't told the doctor about that needs to be pursued? And again, you can't have a machine do this. And that makes people very valuable.
So there's a podcast episode on listening coming up. And one of the things that I discovered was that for a senior executive to listen actively, it is very difficult for them to even get up to 3 minutes a day of active listening. It's just that big of a challenge and skill. So certainly someone who is good at that, I would imagine, would be highly in demand. All right, moving on. Persuasion. It's essentially sales, right?
Well, we're all in sales when it comes right down to it. And some people are literally selling products that they want other people to buy, but you're selling your ideas. You're selling your convictions. Ministers, lawyers, counselors. I mean, someone's got a problem that is amenable to a solution. You need to introduce that solution to your client, to the person on the other side of the table, and to get them to come around to go, you know what? I will stop having that third drink after work, or I will go to the gym. And the ability to understand other people's motivations and to connect to that, crucial.
So yeah, I mean, that what you just said is perfect. I mean, it's very hard to see a machine becoming a pastor.
Yes.
So understanding context, including things like subtlety and nuance, right? Machines probably will get there just through thousands and thousands of repetitions, but it's going to be a long time before that happens.
We are really quick as humans at pattern matching. And you can go back to what we were doing 100,000 years ago and trying to stay alive in, fields and marshes and jungles and what have you. And we had to recognize pretty quick when that stripy thing comes running at you fast, that's probably a cheetah or a lion, and you need to get out of the way. And you don't get too many chances with the stripy thing. And we've carried that into modern day life, and it's remarkable how quickly we can pick up a setting and key off factors, sometimes that we even have a hard time articulating. And when I talk to the people who are trying to get computers to do machine learning and using their neural networks, once they've got a big body of stuff that all happens about the same way, that they're quite good at it. But as long as it's unpredictable, we're still ahead. And a lot of the most interesting areas in life tend to be unpredictable.
Mm-hmm. The list that you had was really long, but one of them that I wanted to get in for a discussion is the appreciation of beauty. That to me is such an interesting thing that humans are capable of. If you don't have thoughts on it, I'm sure that I can contribute thoughts, but I hope you do.
So, take something as simple as music. We've not seen a whole lot of music get automated. And yes, you can come up with something that sounds like an imitation of someone else's music, but it doesn't have that sense of, this is a song that's so sweet it almost makes me cry. Or this is the song I want to play to my friend when they're downbeat and I want to cheer them up. Or this is our couple's song that, it brings back happy memories of times together. And that's part of what makes us human. That's part of the fun of being on this planet, is to just admire something lovely. And I'll put in a plug for the liberal arts curriculum, is that in a lot of fields, you are appreciating some of the world's best poetry. You're getting to study some of the world's best paintings. Even in math, there's a sense of this is a beautiful equation. It's really nice the way it works. And again, that's something that's unique to us. And when we loop it back into persuasion, that ability to invoke beauty will go a lot farther than just running through a bunch of bullet points. Yeah.
It's going to be really hard to replace friendship and partnership and camaraderie. So, people that, in that sense, people that can do that with you.
Just to interject, I was at a talk one time by a leading researcher in artificial intelligence, and he challenged the audience to name things that they thought machines couldn't do. And he swatted down most of them, but there were three that he sort of capitulated and said, you know what, you're right. And one of them was the ability to build consensus. And that comes back to all of the things that we were talking about, listening and persuasion.
Yeah, that's huge.
And another was the ability to feel remorse and project it. And when you think about how we work through difficult situations, being able to say, I'm sorry and mean it, makes a huge difference. And I think that's part of the reason that we don't want autopilot to fly our plane. That in the end, the program doesn't care if we crash. We're just another statistic, and we're putting our lives at risk. We want to be somewhere where whoever's guiding us cares and is deeply committed to our success. And then the third area was lactation. And I don't know how far we should go down that road, but
yeah, let's leave that one there. So the thing that I'm thinking about when you're talking about these things is skin in the game, right?
Yes.
And we're not talking about computer chips in the game. We're talking about skin, which equals humans. I'm going to lump the last three together in the interest of time: humility, empathy, curiosity. How about these?
So curiosity is one of my favorites. I mean, I used to work as a frontline editor at a newspaper, and I would hire people from time to time. And the thing I discovered after a few months is I could teach people almost anything. I could not teach curiosity. If you didn't want to go out and discover stuff, you just weren't going to be very successful as a reporter. And I think it's just so human. I mean, anytime you're around a small child, it's quite amazing watching how they explore and, lift things up and look under the table. And that's just who we are. And it's fun. And I think so much of what we automate tends to look for routines. How do we do the same thing day after day, year after year? So that's why factories get automated. But a lot of the world is not factories, and it needs that level of curiosity. And in fact, as we build a more complicated world, there's so much more to be curious about. I mean, what's happened in biology the last 30 years. I mean, life sciences are just going in a million different directions. Lots of areas for people to explore, lots of room for researchers and for caregivers. And, it's no wonder we're expecting 3 million more healthcare jobs over the next 5 to 7 years. It's a big growth area, and you need that empathy, you need that curiosity.
Yeah, so my understanding is you actually can improve your need for cognition, which is essentially curiosity, although you do have to work for it. But I mean, what you're pointing out is that, I think what you're saying is curiosity is the underpinning of innovation.
Yes, it is. Yeah, and you're right. You can get a little bit better at it, but there's some people who just, are far more, it comes more naturally to them.
The irony, and of course that's the reason that you titled the book like you did, is that these qualities are things that a useless liberal arts education actually can help teach us. Isn't that correct?
Yes, it is. And in fact, I share a personal story in chapter 1. I write books now. That's a major part of what I do. And in the course of writing a book, you end up with far more research than you're going to be able to fit in. And it doesn't all neatly line up. And there's that sort of terrifying moment where you go, oh my goodness, how am I going to be able to use this stuff? And I took a bunch of business classes. I took a bunch of traditional journalism classes. They didn't really help me with that. They gave me a lot of tactical skills that would let me get small projects completed. But it was actually a Slavic literature class on the writings of Fyodor Dostoevsky that first threw me into that kind of situation where I was given 4,000 pages of Dostoevsky to slog through and then told, glue it all together and come up with a thesis. And I struggled through it at age 18 or whatever I was at the time. But that's been my touchstone. And I go, okay, we're back in Dostoevsky land now. I need to create 12 or 14 chapters out of this big stack of notes, and how am I going to do it? And the nice thing about a education in the humanities or the social sciences is you get thrown into the deep end, and you get these big, hard to shape problems. And guess what? Lots of life is like it. And there's no better time to start getting familiar with that than during your college years.
I want to drag this even further into primary education, and it's for a selfish reason. I have an 8-year-old son, and I used to think that I've got to teach my son to code because this is going to be the lingua franca of his time. And, this is how everyone communicates, and communication is, what you need to be able to put out into the world. I don't think that anymore, because I've come to the realization, or I think I have, that by the time he enters the job market, machines will be writing more efficient code than humans ever could. So if I extrapolate into the, past in terms of his education, what skills should I be encouraging if you care to comment, in my 8-year-old today?
So a good starting point is just interacting with other people. And so much of what we've been talking about are person-to-person skills. And, as you think about the kind of summer jobs he's going to have as a teenager, look for ones where he's dealing with people. In our family, we tend to end up with people going to work in hardware stores because, one, that's a good way to learn plumbing and other manly arts. But also, you'll meet adults from all walks of life at all levels of courtesy versus combativeness and insecurity and the whole mix. You'll come away with a much better understanding of how to work with people there. And so that would be one piece. Deal with younger people, too. And the chance to be a coach, a mentor, even a babysitter. That I think that sense of nurturing and care for others who aren't as far along is important. Ben Sass, actually, in his new book, The Nebraska Senator, makes a case for having children and teens come into contact with people of different ages. So that would be a big piece. Beyond that, just let them explore a bit. I remember a colleague of mine had worked in Japan when he was younger, and he said the Japanese people would always ask him, we have so much better math and science scores than you do. How come you guys keep inventing all this stuff? And Steve's answer was because we have downtime, because we have idle summer vacations and people have to make up what they do. And there's something about just, exploring by the creek that tends to develop that. Now, of course, we tend to overprogram our children and our teenagers now, but that sense of having a day with nothing specific to fill and room to go figure out, now what am I going to do with my time, actually ends up being surprisingly useful in adulthood. And if there's one worry I have, it's that too many of our teenagers and college graduates have spent so much time with syllabuses that they expect to be told everything and to be given everything in order. And when they don't get the instruction manual, they don't know how to create their own one. So, give him a little bit of room to make some small mistakes and to learn some lessons himself.
So it sounds like mindfulness, that makes sense. Next question, this is going to sound maybe a little odd. Eventually, as we string this out over time, are we as a society going to end up made up entirely of painters, artists, actors, composers, people, that we talked about that can appreciate beauty, people that can interpret, people that have need for cognition? Is that where we're all heading?
I like the tone of that question. I think the old John Maynard Keynes argument is that we'll have much more leisure time and we'll be doing all of this. I think the boundaries between work and leisure are much blurrier than they used to be. We're certainly going to have more bloggers. We've made it possible now for everyone to publish, and we're all pundits, we're all authors, and some of that will pay a little bit. I think we may have a wider boundary between what's a hobby and what's a career, and people may have a foot in both of those worlds. But I think the human desire to create is wonderful. I think we've got a generational challenge that there are a lot of people who bought into a very different view of work. And now the system has sort of thrown them to the side in their 40s or 50s, and they're going, what do I do? And I engage, every month or two with someone who's in that predicament. And just because it's interesting and I want to be useful, I try and help them find jobs. But it can be a real challenge. And I think it's a lot easier if you start out in your teens expecting to have a foot in this improvisational, creative world than if you came into the workforce expecting that you'd have one stable career for your whole life and then they change the rules on you in the middle.
Yeah. My long-term thinking on it is that value is going to be about what you can imagine and communicate, whether that is cartooning or creating music or painting beautiful paintings, or even designing an interesting computer program. That it's about what you can create within yourself and figure out a way to put out into the world for other people to appreciate.
Yeah, and that can be very fulfilling at a lot of different levels. You don't have to be the very best cartoonist in the world as long as you're creating cartoons for a community that likes what you're doing.
Yeah, that's a great point. Okay, so since this is a podcast for, among other people, founders, let me ask you a couple questions on their behalf. It's a little more dour. Is the contraction of some industries the driver of more entrepreneurial spirit? or less?
So there's some data from the Kauffman Foundation that actually suggests that we're starting fewer companies these days, which would be a pity. That you'd like to think that as big company opportunities narrow, people are more willing to try found their own businesses. The one community for which that's an exception is the Latino community, and the rate of business formation there is very high. These tend not to be businesses that try and get to 100 million in sales and unicorn valuations. They tend to be businesses that sustain one family and are quite localized. But I'm a big believer in the entrepreneurial spirit. I've done it both ways. I've worked for giant companies and I've been my own boss. And once you pick the entrepreneurial path, it's really hard to switch. And it's so liberating to, you can always get a meeting with your boss and your boss will generally let you do what you want to do. So I hope to see that increase, and I hope that people don't lose their nerve just because we've ended up in a turbulent economy. That sometimes if you can invent your way out of problems, that's the best path.
It's the allegory of the cave, right? Once you've seen the light, it's very hard to go back to the dark.
Yes, well put.
How do entrepreneurs cultivate this humanity that we're talking about in themselves? Is there a way?
So first thing is to try and understand what's another person's values. And I think sometimes there's the founder's desire to assume that you're right, and that the louder you speak, the more the rest of the world will embrace your rightness. And whether it's building a team or working with customers, sometimes you just need to go, what is it that they want? And being able to put yourself in the other person's shoes. And that starts out as a very forced exercise, and you almost have to mechanically run through a list of what do I know about their assumptions? What assumptions do they have that are different than mine? Are they trying to maximize for money? Are they trying to maximize for reputation? Are they just risk avoiders who I need to spend a lot of time explaining why this won't fail on them before I can spend any time explaining how it will work? But that would really be my starting point, is just try and figure out the other person. And that takes you a big step of the road toward empathy. And then you're communicating in a way that'll help you get things done.
And as I'm hiring people for my startup, how do I spot these people? I think you're probably among the best people to ask this question to, because it seems like you've spent a lot of time thinking about it, particularly kind of in that post-college era. How do I find people with the right qualities?
Lori Gohler, who's head of talent at Facebook, has a really interesting question she uses for exactly that reason. And if you look at Facebook's growth and their market presence, whatever they're putting in their stew, it's probably worth us going to that same part of the spice cabinet too. But her question is, tell me about your very best day at work. And then she just sits still and lets people fill the space. And one, it's a really good way of having people identify their values. Because if you ask them, what are your values, you'll get a mechanical checklist that's just meant to impress you. But if you get people talking about situations where they helped other people, that tells you something. If you get them talking about the day that they made the most money, that tells you something. And it's not as if there's a right or wrong answer, with the exception of a few very maladjusted people on the edge. But it will give you a sense of, is this someone that I want to put on my large accounts because they like predictability? Is this someone I want to have go prospecting for new accounts because they like creativity and uncertainty? And it's non-threatening. So people tend to not just highlight their strengths, but also give you a sense of what their deficits might be. Anyway, I love it as a question, and it's the kind of thing that you don't have to worry so much about canned answers. Whatever people tell you is going to speak to who they are.
Yeah. I also feel like if you do find that person with a high degree of humanness, for lack of a better, or kind of a contraction, that will really help with your corporate culture as well.
Yes, it will. In fact, I was talking with someone who ran a program for the U.S. Army where they were trying to identify good recruits, and they had them go through a simulation. And they did not tend to sign up the people who went for the most kills. They signed up the people who helped the other wounded soldiers on the battlefield get back to safety, because they can teach you to be a better killer. They can't really teach you to care about your fellow soldier. And it was really interesting. But look for that compassion.
Interesting. That just brings up that Mel Gibson movie that came out last Christmas about that one particular private who refused to carry a gun, and everybody was just like, I don't want the fight with that guy. And then he ended up saving, half of his regiment in a tough situation, and they all realized that he was, probably the person with the most mettle and the most resolve of all of them. So, okay. This question is a little out of order, and the reason for that is because it occurred to me only as you were asking or answering a question a moment ago. The question is this Elon Musk type innovation, meaning the type that's creating whole new industries around space travel or electricity, or in this case, autonomous cars, is this type of innovation actually going to be a counterbalance to automation? Because I guess this goes back to the beginning of the interview when I was like, are we extrapolating towards something bad? And you're like, no, in fact, we've started creating more jobs. Is this the Model T that's replacing horse and buggy?
It's so interesting to see how new technology spreads through time. And I actually have a little riff in the book about, when we first had cars come onto the scene, you could have gotten stressed about, oh my goodness, it's a terrible day to be a horse or to be anyone working with horses. But look at all the other things that cars went and created for us. That, we needed driving schools, we needed car insurance companies, we needed car dealers. We had much greater need for intercity maps. We had all of the restaurants and motels that opened up along the highway. We had all these personal injury lawyers to take care of what happened when you got in an accident. And the multiplier effect on bringing cars into the U.S. economy was absolutely huge. And some of these things took 10, 20, 30 years to play out. So when you look at self-driving cars, I'm not sure I can see all of the ways that that's going to bring new jobs into the economy, but someone actually modeled up some ideas for the Sloan review that MIT does, and among them was automation ethicists. Someone's going to have to decide, what do you do when the car sees a potential danger spot? And that's not an easy question to solve. You may need a lot of automation ethicists. They may need to go to conferences and do studies and publish research. So I don't yet know where the next wave of jobs are coming, but history would tell us that when we see disruptive technology, somehow we end up figuring an awful lot of other things to do that wrap around it. So Elon Musk himself won't create all of those jobs, but he will create a lot of opportunities for other people to do so.
Yes, of course. And this last one is more about how the ecosystem kind of heals or fixes itself over time. When we think about dislocation associated with automation, who should hold themselves responsible for helping try to put solutions into the workplace? Is it technologists, because technologists are essentially causing some of these problems? Is it politicians? Who do you think should be responsible?
So Bill Gates, of all people, has suggested that we have a robot tax. And if robots are taking away traditional human jobs, we've got a transition issue. Eventually, people will find new work, but you need to create some sort of pathway or cushion while we go through what's a 2-year or 5-year or 8-year transition. And his thinking is, tax the robot. So I haven't figured out where I come out on this one. There are days where I think that's really clever, and there are days where I think that's really disruptive. But it's a very intriguing idea. And when you pinpointed technologists versus politicians, hopefully you come up with a system that both of them like. And political structure is probably your best way to sort of raise money and disperse it. But you'd hope that it's going to be done in a way that doesn't stifle innovation and softens the social impact without leaving us in a world where it's impossible to innovate.
Yeah. It's something that you could go so many different directions on. I'll tell you, George, I want to end here. I should maybe ask one more thing. Is there anything else that I didn't ask about that you think is particularly pertinent to this topic that you'd like to add?
So we've covered a tremendous range of territory. There's one closing thought in the book that I wanted to share, and so much of my emphasis is what do we do for our college graduate population, people who are coming out into this brave new world. But I argue in one of the last chapters that a lot of this ability to tap into the humanist perspective, to humanize tech, is not restricted to people in their 20s and 30s, that there are ways to do it in your 40s and 50s as well. So for listeners of all ages, this is it's a young person's strategy, but it's really a strategy that can work at any stage in life as well.
Yeah, I would argue that people should be constantly repositioning, right? That they should be constantly looking at the environment, trying to understand what's next. And if anything, the process of learning is of value add mentally to people, but the ancillary benefit is that they maintain relevance for significantly longer. So I think that's a perfect point to end with.
I have a 20% rule in my own life, which is 20% of what I get paid for is going to be stuff that I didn't know how to do a year or two ago. And if I ever let that ratio go down much farther, I'm just not as employable. And it's exciting. It's fun to learn new things. And it's very fulfilling to feel that we're still getting better at what we do.
I am glad you added that last piece in there. I have no doubt that I will be getting emails about that very thing once people listen to this podcast. Where, I don't know if you want to be found or not, but assuming that you do, where can listeners find you?
So if you want to hear more about the book, www.georgeandersbooks.com is a great place to get up to date on that. I'm on Twitter at George Anders. And if you check the Forbes site, you can see a lot of my writing. I'm on LinkedIn as well. I'm fairly active as a LinkedIn influencer.
Fantastic. Well, I'll tell you, I enjoyed reading the book. I'm sure other people will too. And even more so, I've enjoyed this particular topic. It's kind of a near and dear to my heart. And you're so well thought on this. It's been a great pleasure. Thank you very much for being on.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it.
This has been Intangibles, a podcast created by Antecedent Ventures. Find out more at www.antecedent.vc. I'd like to thank Denton's Venture Technology Group at dentonsventurebeyond.com for being the sponsor this season and a supportive partner. Operating as a boutique within the world's largest law firm, the Venture Technology Group runs with hard-charging tech entrepreneurs to drive growth through strategic business, finance, and legal advice, from Silicon Valley and New York to London, Berlin, Hong Kong, and beyond. Learn more at dentonsventurebeyond.com. I'd also like to thank Ben Glowy, who's been instrumental in helping me record and produce this season. I couldn't have done it without him. Find him on Twitter at visible_sound. And thank you. Keep an eye out for the next episode, and if you like this one, leave us a favorable review. I'm your host, Steve BERG.